Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Hendersonville in North Carolina. I'm Becky Reed, your worship associate for this service. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, I honor the place in you where the entire universe resides, a place of light, of love, of truth, of peace, of wisdom. I honor the place in you where when you are in that place, I am in that place. There is only one of us. Let us be one in this hour, whoever you are, and no matter your journey, we welcome you here. To learn about our activities that we are able to offer virtually, I invite you to visit our website at uufhnc.org. Also, please join us Sunday at 11:30 for our Stones of Compassion and Beloved Conversation on Zoom. Our speaker today is Dr. Michael Yates, whom we are fortunate to have as a member of our congregation. Mike and his wife Barbara have spent more than 30 years living and working overseas. He served as the U.S. Agency for International Development's mission director in 5 different countries. He holds a PhD in anthropology from Columbia University, completed postdoctoral studies in agricultural and rural development through the Rockefeller Foundation, and received the President's Meritorious Service Award in 2011. His work has included support for programs in environmental management, global climate change, and biological diversity in South America, Asia, and Africa. He and his wife retired in 2017, and since that time, Mike has given lectures on development at different universities, including UNC Asheville, Furman, Western Carolina, and Mars Hill. Forests have always been high on his lists of what he loves most, and that is what he will be talking about today. We light this candle to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace.
Good morning. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have this opportunity to talk with you today, and I thank Ron Parton and the worship team for making it so. And while I will be talking in very general terms about some of the things I've worked on in earlier years, please note that any views or opinions I express today are entirely my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. government. We all, as Unitarian Universalists, affirm and promote 7 fundamental principles. These are not dogma or doctrine, but rather guides that can help point us towards a better world. Each is powerful and can serve as a lens through which we see more clearly what is right and what is just. Several of these principles come together in the context of environmental justice, a theme we have embraced with the leadership of our social justice outreach team. And 2 in particular can help us to better understand the problem of deforestation, or the widespread destruction of the world's forests, especially tropical forests. And that's what I'll talk about today. And while we're not on the front lines on this issue, living far from places like Brazil, the Congo, or Indonesia, there is much wisdom in hymn 134 in our gray hymnal, Our World is One World. Deforestation, even in faraway places, affects us all in important ways right here at home, and we, in turn, can affect it. So let's start with our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. An estimated 60 million people live in the world's forests, and according to National Geographic, some 250 million rely on forests for a key part of their livelihoods. And that estimate is actually pretty conservative. In any case, that's a lot of people, roughly equal to the total populations of Great Britain, France, Germany, and Spain combined, though the forest peoples have far less visibility and are generally among the world's poorest. So what happens to the forest communities when the trees are cut down and destroyed, whether legally or illegally, to raise more cattle or to plant more soybeans, corn, or oil palm? As you can imagine, they can lose their homes, their communities, and just about all aspects of their way of life, from the foods they eat to the clothes they wear. Their cultures, spiritual beliefs, and eventually their languages can be lost as well. With everything they've ever known destroyed, they may have little choice but to move to the towns and cities to survive, though there people speak a different language and can hold deep prejudice towards the indigenous. Finding work can be very difficult, and in order to feed their children, some may have little resource but to beg and live on the streets, where they can find accelerating rates of disease, malnutrition, alcoholism, and abuse. Our first principle is lost tragically in such circumstances. There is no real recognition of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now we'll move to our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. That interdependent web is palpable in tropical forest, and if I may, such places can awaken a deeper spiritual sense. I confess to feeling like becoming one with the greater single living organism. You whisper as you absorb it all with wonder, and you can feel, as the novelist Peter Matheson has written, at play in the fields of the Lord. These are very special places. E.O. Wilson has written that tropical rainforests may contain a majority of all the living species on Earth, and just 1 hectare of rainforest, and that's an area roughly the size of a city block, can hold as many as 650 different species of trees. And that's more tree species than are found in all of the United States and Canada combined. These forests hold an astonishing amount of biological diversity, but that diversity is also astonishingly fragile. Countless numbers of species are in imminent danger of extinction. And the interdependent nature of plants and animals in such forests is extraordinary, with each playing key roles in ensuring their mutual survival. For example, as sources of food, seed dispersal, pollination, nesting sites, and the ground disturbance that encourages natural regeneration. I'll mention just one example of interdependence, though there are many. The agouti, a large rodent about the size of a raccoon, and its relationship to the towering Brazil nut tree. It turns out that the only animal in the rainforest with teeth strong enough to open the hard Brazil nut pod is the agouti. And when they do crack open that softball-sized sphere, like squirrels, they eat some of the nuts right away, but also bury some for later in different places. And like some of us, they don't always remember where they've left things. That means some of those seeds will sprout and grow, having been planted by the forgetful agouti, and that means there will be new Brazil nut trees for successive generations to enjoy. Successive generations not only of agouti, but of people too. Brazil nut trees are an important source of income for forest peoples, and in 2018, Bolivia, the world's largest producer, exported $228 million worth of Brazil nuts. And this couldn't have been done without the modest agouti. And that's important to remember, since agouti are an important source of wild game. If the agouti disappear, for example, through too much hunting, over time there will be far fewer Brazil nut trees in the forest, and the forest itself will change. But setting aside those who enjoy eating Brazil nuts, why should such biological diversity in faraway forests be important to us here in Western North Carolina? Well, here's something to think about. 70% of the 3,000 plants identified by the National Cancer Institute as having potential anti-cancer properties are found in tropical forests. And rainforest-based pharmaceuticals are now being used to help treat diseases including multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and various kinds of cancer. Scientific American in 2019 reports that 1/4 of our modern pharmaceuticals are derived from rainforest plants. And I wouldn't be surprised if many of us have used or are currently using medicines that trace their origins to the rainforest. Yet, only an estimated 1 to 5% of the rainforest trees and other flora have even been evaluated for their medicinal potential. So what other life-saving medicines may be out there waiting to be discovered? And what about potential new and naturally occurring insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and even food crops in the intense and intensely complex biological mix? The Yanomamo people living in the Amazon basin reportedly use an estimated 500 different forest plants. And that reminds us that it is not only the plants, animals, and forest peoples that disappear when the forests are destroyed, it is also the indigenous knowledge about the uses of this remarkably rich biological cornucopia that can be lost forever. These living libraries of indigenous knowledge also disappear. So there's no question but that this issue is urgent, not only for the forest peoples, but for us all. What's lost is lost forever. Now let's look at global climate change and greenhouse gases, also part of our interdependent web of all existence. And here, deforestation works in two truly terrible ways. First, cutting and burning the forests adds an enormous amount of carbon to the atmosphere, and this accelerates climate change. In fact, each year, deforestation adds more carbon than all the cars and trucks in the world. According to the World Resources Institute, if tropical deforestation were a country, it would rank third in carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, right behind China and the US. But in addition to accelerating climate change, deforestation also destroys the ability of the forest to function as what's called carbon sinks. Forests naturally draw down carbon from the atmosphere and lock it into trees and other organic matter. In place of that carbon, these forests exhale oxygen. And there's a great deal if I've ever heard one. According to Paul Hawken, who wrote the book Drawdown that many of us know, while mitigating, stabilizing, or reducing the amount of greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere, for example, through good things like using solar and wind energy, is very, very important. These measures won't help to reverse climate change, though they do help to slow it down. To quote Hawken, drawdown depends on bringing carbon back home, and there's only one way we know how to do it, and that is through photosynthesis. Now, I'm sure you'll all remember from your high school biology class that photosynthesis is how plants grow, using sunlight to synthesize food from carbon dioxide and water, and generating as a byproduct oxygen. So in order to achieve actual drawdown, we need growing things that pull more carbon out of the atmosphere than they put into it with their production. And that's just what forests do. Maybe technology will come up with something better in the future, but for now, healthy forests are our best way to pull down and safely store some of the atmospheric carbon that is contributing mightily to climate change. But while identifying the problem is an important first step, it won't actually fix it. And to do that, we first need to understand what drives deforestation around the world. The short answer is, perhaps not surprisingly, money. Forests generally have little or no economic value to many living in countries with rich tropical forests, though, as we've seen, they can literally mean life and death to millions of marginalized forest peoples. In places like the Amazon and Indonesia, large tracts of forest continue to be cut and burned, releasing their stored carbon into the atmosphere. And these forest lands, once cleared, are often used by farmers and commercial enterprises to make way for more crops and more cattle. In Asia, oil palm plantations are a key driver of deforestation, while in the Congo Basin, illegal logging and mining are also important. Is there any way we can get these farmers and business interests to leave their forests standing and not cut them down? Well, we know this certainly won't happen if we just ask them to do so, even if we ask very nicely. In fact, I'm pretty sure they'd say, why should we leave our forests standing and miss out on the income that we can get from agriculture, logging, and ranching? And if we remind them how deforestation helps fuel global warming, my guess is they might point out that we put much more carbon into the atmosphere over more than 200 years of industrialization than have they. In fact, we're still dumping more carbon into the atmosphere per capita than they are. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, our per capita carbon emissions are about 7 times as great as those of someone living in Brazil. So they might reasonably ask, if I agree to leave my forests alone, what's in it for me? I think that's a fair question. And thinking about being fair, if we all share in the important benefits that these forests provide, isn't it only fair for us to also share in the costs of maintaining them? And how might we think about this in more concrete terms? Well, just thinking out loud, what if we were to work with other countries to pay these farmers and other forest users to keep their forests standing rather than to destroy them? That would presumably help us all to maintain that stream of positive benefits we now enjoy, from mitigating climate change to providing important pharmaceuticals and other valuable forest products. Costa Rica offers an interesting example. Many years ago, the government there was alarmed at how quickly its forests were being destroyed, so they decided to provide a financial incentive to keep them standing, and in fact, to expand forest cover. Farmers can be paid $64 per hectare per year for maintaining their forests, with the funding for this effort coming largely from a tax on fossil fuels. And that obviously provides a double benefit for the environment. Costa Rica is now recognized as a world leader in environmental management, and this has paid very well for them in terms of ecotourism. But Costa Rica is a small country, and not every place will be able to attract ecotourists to its far-flung forests, often with very little or no tourism infrastructure. So, are there other models we might consider? Well, first, in many cases, there may be no better way to save tropical forests than to grant them to organized indigenous peoples groups. For example, Scientific American and Survival International, among others, argue that rates of deforestation in the Amazon are far lower in areas managed by indigenous communities. In fact, even lower than in official national parks and protected areas. But while that's a wonderful example of environmental justice and smart resource stewardship, others might argue that it comes with some economic opportunity costs, and money most often drives the chainsaws. But come to think of it, there's probably no country on earth with more experience using money to get farmers not to plant than the United States. Here, we've been paying farmers for many years not to plant corn, soybeans, and other crops on some of their land. In fact, according to Forbes, in 2017, US taxpayers paid US farmers $1.8 billion precisely to compensate them for not planting, including to support soil conservation and good farm prices. And note that's more than twice the funding provided globally to the world's leading effort to combat deforestation and forest degradation, called REDD+, managed by the United Nations. Well, I'm sure this all sounds expensive, but here's a little more food for thought. In 2018, the federal government's Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, or GAO, shared a study authored by more than 300 experts that calculated that climate change has already cost US taxpayers more than $350 billion over the past decade. And the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported a figure of $91 billion just in 2018 because of climate and weather disasters. So maybe the right question isn't, can we afford to pay for the kinds of things that will help reduce climate change, including to keep the world's forests standing, but rather, can we afford not to? We can pay now or we can pay later, and lots more later. But getting back down to the local level, the good news is that there are some things we can do now on our own to help address the problem of deforestation, if in a small way. One is to support sustainable forestry management initiatives with eco-certification of woods and other forest products. Eco-certification requires producers to comply with a series of environmental and social guidelines. And while it allows for careful forest product harvesting, it does so in a way that protects the forests, their peoples, and their biological diversity, as verified through periodic independent audits. Eco-certification uses green markets and consumer preferences to make the forests more valuable as forests, and in that way can provide incentives to reduce deforestation. Why go through the time and effort to clear and burn your forest if, with some help from the market, you can make good money by leaving them standing? During our discussion afterwards, I'd be delighted to talk in detail about one such project in South America, and about how it continues to help indigenous and other peoples to safeguard their way of life, as well as the natural forest and the biodiversity it contains. Here we can also make a difference as consumers by examining the products we buy. We can look for wood and other products that display eco-certification logos, for example, from the FSC or Forest Stewardship Council, though there are several certification entities that are doing good work. And fortunately, such products are not hard to find in our supermarkets, building supply stores, and in other places where we shop. And note that a key point here is not to avoid tropical or other forest products, that won't help, but rather to go out of our way to purchase them, but only if they are certified as sustainably produced. Doing so adds value to well-managed forests, and that provides incentives to help keep these forests standing. We can also pay attention to the foods we buy and the local restaurant chains we patronize, and avoid meats or edible oils that are linked to deforestation. For example, while not the healthiest of oils, palm oil is enormously productive, using significantly less land to produce the same amount of edible oil as corn or soy. Palm oil is used in a wide variety of consumer goods, everything from lipsticks and shampoos to baked goods, ice creams, and many prepared foods. Fortunately, the World Wildlife Fund maintains online a good palm oil scorecard, working with the International Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. It lists different consumer brands, including national fast food chains, so you can see which are committed to using only sustainably produced certified palm oil, with no links to deforestation. According to the World Wildlife Fund, some 20% of the world's palm oil is now certified, and let's hope that number grows. Unfortunately, though, while these efforts all help, they haven't stopped ongoing deforestation. There's still small steps, if steps in the right direction. So in addition to all of the above, much more work is needed. However, it is encouraging to see an increasing number of businesses around the world making commitments to zero deforestation in their supply chains. Some of the work begins by educating people about why this issue is so important and so urgent, and to explain how their consumer choices can affect deforestation. We can make our preferences known to local businesses and thank those that already comply with eco-certification guidelines. There are also different international players, including, of course, many non-governmental organizations that are working hard to save the rainforests, and these can be great groups to support. With respect to the public sector, we can encourage our elected representatives to support legislation aimed at protecting tropical forests and forest peoples, and give greater priority to international efforts aimed at reducing deforestation and forest degradation. And we can do these things not only as individuals, but as Unitarian Universalists, as we affirm and promote our clear and powerful principles, including the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Our principles help us to see the world more clearly and provide moral guidelines for responsible action, even actions that can affect what happens many thousands of miles away from UUFH. Of course, there are many things we already do as UUs to help make a better world, but I hope we will include on our lists helping to save the world's forests in ways large and small, with their rich but endangered forest peoples, carbon sinks, and biological diversity. It fits in perfectly with what we believe and affirm. And coincidentally, today is Grandparents' Day, so congratulations to all you grandparents. Note, though, that over the last 100 years, a period of time that a good many of us have seen the better part of, more than half of the world's rainforests have been destroyed. So how much of this remarkable cultural and natural wealth will we leave to our grandchildren? And how much will they leave to theirs? The clock is ticking, and what's lost is lost forever. Thank you all for listening.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Corrigan, chair of the UUFH Social Justice Outreach Team, or SJOT. I want to thank Michael for his insightful presentation, expanding our knowledge of these environmental injustices and their serious impacts on people and the planet. His focus on our UU principles and actions we might take to help address deforestation make this even more meaningful. Back in February, before COVID-19 changed so much of our daily lives, UUFH members chose climate justice as our congregational project. Next Sunday, September 20th, SJOT will hold its first ever virtual outreach collection to support Creation Care Alliance of Western North Carolina. Creation Care Alliance is a network of people of faith and congregations who have united around a moral and spiritual call to preserve the integrity, beauty, and health of the planet. CCA promotes the protection of our beautiful mountains by bringing practical and hopeful solutions to congregations in Western North Carolina and by engaging hearts and minds through education, service, and advocacy. During the service next week, Jan Parton will share more information about Creation Care Alliance. You'll be able to donate online and by check. From its inception, a key part of our justice project has included efforts to elect people who represent all Americans and who share our UU values of caring for our planet. Closing out September, the UUFH September 27th Sunday worship service will highlight the nationwide UUA campaign effort, Vote Love, Defeat Hate. Thank you all, and be well.